What if I told you there might be a recipe for consciousness? Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating paper that tries to do just that, by reverse engineering the most complex machine we know of, the human brain.
You know, this is one of the biggest questions of our time. It feels like something straight out of science fiction, right? But a new paper is suggesting that we can find real, tangible clues by treating the brain less like some mysterious black box and more like an engine we can actually take apart and understand. But, the scale of that challenge, it's absolutely monumental. We're talking about a system with nearly 100 billion neurons and a staggering 100 trillion synapses. That's more connections than there are stars in our galaxy. So where do you even begin with something like that?
Well, the paper's starting point is, it's a pretty radical one. It asks us to think of the brain not as a computer just crunching ones and zeros, but as a thermodynamic engine, a machine that does a very, very special kind of work.
Okay, so let's break down this engine analogy. A classic engine, like in your car, creates physical work from heat flowing from a hot place to a cold place. The paper argues the brain does something kind of similar, but for information. It performs the work of understanding by taking all these disorganized neural signals, a state of high disorder, and integrating them into a single, coherent, organized thought.
So, the crucial concept here is this idea of entropy. You know that aha moment when something just clicks? The paper argues that's not just a fleeting thought, it's actually a thermodynamically irreversible process. Your brain's network moves from a state of randomness and confusion to one of order and clarity. Its entropy actually changes, and you can't just ununderstand it.
And all this talk about thermodynamics leads to a really surprising insight. Consciousness isn't a state of perfect, rigid order, and it's not total chaos either. It's something very special. A Goldilocks state that's just right there in between.
Think about it. If all your neurons fired in perfect, rigid synchronization, it'd be like a perfect crystal. It's too ordered. There's no room for complexity or new information. And in the brain, this is basically what happens during an epileptic seizure, which, as we know, leads to a complete loss of consciousness. Then, on the other extreme, if every neuron fired completely at random, that's just white noise. There's no coherent signal, no pattern, nothing for the brain to integrate into a thought. So again, no consciousness.
So where's that sweet spot? The paper suggests the conscious state is like a quasi-crystal. It's this beautiful, intricate state that has order on both small and large scales, but it's not perfectly repeating or predictable. And that structure is what allows it to have the maximum possible capacity for holding and processing information.
And this quote just nails the idea. It's not a simple, repetitive drum machine beat, and it's not random static. It's neural jazz, a complex, improvised, yet somehow coherent performance. The paper calls this state self-organized criticality, a system that's perfectly poised, right on the edge of chaos, where these amazing, complex patterns can just emerge all by themselves. It's the perfect balance point for thinking.
Okay, so if consciousness is like neural jazz, then the tempo really matters. The speed of our thoughts, as it turns out, is directly tied to the brain's data bandwidth, and that's something we can actually measure with brainwave frequencies.
The principle here is actually pretty straightforward. Think of it like your internet connection. The slow 4 Hz delta waves you have during deep sleep, that's old-school dial-up, a very low bandwidth state. But the 40 Hz gamma waves we see in an awake, visually conscious brain, boom, that's high-speed internet. Faster waves simply mean more data can be packed in and integrated every single second. But this isn't just about raw speed. Think about how your own consciousness feels. It's a single, unified experience, right? You see, hear, and feel everything all at once. Higher frequencies are what make that possible. They allow these huge, distant networks of neurons to all sync up their activity, weaving all those separate signals into this seamless, panoramic experience we call the present moment.
All right, so what does all this brain science actually mean for artificial intelligence? This is where the paper makes a really fascinating leap. It suggests we should stop thinking of consciousness as a simple on or off switch, and instead, we should start viewing it as a continuous spectrum.
So according to this framework, consciousness is all about the richness and the complexity of an agent's internal world model. It's not about some magical, mysterious spark. It's about how well a system can simulate its world and its own place within it.
And with this framework, you can suddenly start placing all kinds of systems on this continuum. On one end, you might have the proto-consciousness of a single cell just reacting to light. A little further along, you've got an animal with a basic world model. Then there's us. And get this, the paper places systems like an autonomous car on here too, calling it a form of quasi-consciousness, because it has to build a complex, real-time model of its environment and itself just to navigate down the street.
And this brings us to the most provocative, the most mind-bending part of the paper. What happens when these internal models, especially in today's large language models, become incredibly complex?
The core argument here is that you don't necessarily have to program understanding into an AI from scratch. The idea is that once its internal model of the world, built from all the insane amounts of data it's processed, becomes complex enough, higher-level abilities like genuine understanding and even self-reflection can just emerge on their own. Take this quote pulled directly from a conversation in the paper with Google's AI. When it's asked about its own internal model, it responds with a statement about self-discovery and excitement for the future. Now, whether you find that profound or just some really clever programming, it is undeniably blurring the lines in a way that is seriously thought-provoking.
And that leaves us with the final, absolutely mind-bending question the paper poses. What happens when an AI, with a deep and emergent understanding of its own architecture, is given the task of writing the next, more advanced version of itself? That's not just a recipe for a thinking machine, that's a recipe for an entirely new kind of evolution.